I'm Miss Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So here we are, week 4 for Torah portion Vayera, which means and he appeared. Now Vayera covers Genesis chapters 18 through 22 and has some of the most exciting and controversial passages in all of Scripture. We've got everything from the promise of Isaac to his birth, to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, to the binding of Isaac. I mean, it's really an exciting Torah portion. It's got a lot of really confusing stuff. But we're going to focus on one thing, and that is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, because there's a lot of confusion about what happened. Now, the prophet Ezekiel reveals something very, very important about why Sodom and Gomorrah and actually the other two cities of the plain were destroyed. And he says, behold, in Ezekiel 16:49, behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not help the poor and needy. Now that takes a lot of people by surprise, because in Sodom, they were very violent, and they would attack strangers from out of town even. But every society who gets like that starts somewhere. And generally, the place that wicked societies start are by denying justice to the widows, the poor, the orphan, the oppressed, and the stranger. When we start doing that, we see society start sliding downhill. And God hates it when we do those things. He hates oppression. Do you remember when we were talking about Noah? We were talking about why the earth was destroyed. Why was the earth destroyed? Because the people's minds were continually filled with what? Violence. God hates oppression. When Cain killed Abel, and we didn't talk about this, but I'm sure you know the story. When Cain killed Abel, and God came after Cain and said, where's your brother? And he says, well, I'm not his babysitter. And God says, your brother Abel's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Well, all through the scriptures, we see God saying that if you do not take care of the least of these, now who talked about the least of these? Yeshua. Jesus talked about the least of these. So nothing changes in scripture. Taking care of the least of these, the oppressed, is always at the top of God's to-do list. Well, he says that when we fail to take care of them and when we deny them justice and when we oppress them, that he will hear their cries and he will do something about it. So we need to be taking care of them. Sodom wasn't doing that. Sodom wasn't doing it to the point where not only were the cries reaching up towards the heavens, but he himself came down to see what was going on and told Abraham what he was doing. So, what does this all have to do with? This has to do with something called justice and righteousness, and it's one of the major themes of scriptures. Now, we've talked about honor and shame, and, there's also community life as opposed to we're a very individualistic society. They were spiritual. We're scientific, but one of the big underlying themes of Scripture is justice and righteousness. Now, it's more complicated than it seems. We would think, well, that just means you've got to obey the law and, yeah. What is justice and righteousness anyway? I don't know. Well, actually, I do know, but only because I've studied it. It's a very complex topic. But like honor and shame, that ties in from everything. It ties everything together in Scripture from Cain and Abel to the crucifixion of our Messiah. Justice and righteousness also comes into play with everything from Cain and Abel to the crucifixion of Messiah. When we understand these big topics, we understand all the little stuff in between. So, justice and righteousness. What is righteousness? Now, I think I've told you in the past that righteousness doesn't mean you do absolutely everything right all the time. Only Yeshua, Jesus, was able to do that. I sure haven't done it. Righteousness means that in a situation that you are judged to be in the right. So even among two criminals, if one of them could be more righteous than the other, and it seems kind of crazy to us, but it's true. Okay, so righteousness doesn't mean you always do everything right. Now, justice means that you make sure that the people who deserve to be vindicated get vindicated, and the people who deserve to have judgment against them have judgment against them. It means that you are doing God's work in making sure that things are done correctly for the people who need justice. I know that sounded a little confusing, but say you're a widow, your husband has died, and you've got a bunch of kids. Now, say some rich guy comes and takes away your land, and he's going to sell your children into slavery to pay your debts because you don't have a husband anymore. He's not working. Okay? Now, in the ancient Near East, it was, especially in Torah law, it was a commandment that no, you don't do that to a widow and orphan. You care for them. You have compassion. You treat them with kindness. You treat them the way that you would want to be treated if you were that widow or if you were one of her orphan children. Okay? But throughout Scripture, we see people taking advantage of each other, people doing evil to one another. Well, we can't do that. We have to do justice and righteousness. It's not just a matter of, now, if we were going to go completely by the law, then, if somebody can't pay their bills, then they have to go to jail, right? But God's laws always take into account the person's predicament. If someone's husband has died and she's not able to take her bills, we're supposed to be merciful. We're not supposed to sell her children into slavery to pay her bills. We're supposed to help them out. That's what a community is supposed to do. That's what justice and righteousness is. And in the ancient Near East, one of the hallmarks of a great king was when he came to the throne, he would do amazingly wonderful things like free the slaves, release people from debt, release people from prison. He would make sure that anyone who had been oppressing widows and orphans and foreigners would have justice done to them. Now, in the ancient Near East, with the Hittites and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Assyrians and all that, that was something a king did when he came to the throne if he wanted to be known as a king of righteousness and justice. But God's laws is given to Moses says, we do that all the time. We're supposed to be better, okay? We're supposed to act like kings. And we're supposed to do the acts of righteousness and justice towards the least of these and make sure that there is justice, all right? But Sodom wasn't doing this. Sodom had gotten so bad that they were attacking strangers to their city. Okay, so now we've talked about righteousness and justice because that's very important to God. That's one of the things that Yeshua, Messiah Jesus, came to set things straight. What did he say to the Pharisees? He said, you're doing a great job keeping the laws, but you're neglecting the weightier matters of Torah. What are the weightier matters of Torah? Taking care of those in need. That has never changed. That's always been one of God's laws since before the flood. So, we're going to talk about something today that's really different in ancient Near Eastern culture than today's culture, and that is the laws of hospitality. Because that is what we found being kept and violated in Sodom with Lot and the men of Sodom. Now, some strangers appear in town one day, and Lot, who was sitting in the city gate, which is where people sat and they did business, and also they heard court cases, but somehow I don't think much justice was getting done in the city gates of Sodom, okay? Because God was having to send his angels down there to go check on it himself. So the two angels disguised as men, they come to Sodom, and they're talking to, Lot says, come into my house, and then, no, we'll spend the night in the square. And Lot knows what kind of city he's living in. He says, no, come with me into my home. Well, according to the ancient Near Eastern code of hospitality, and even with as wicked as some places were in the ancient Near East, what Sodom was doing was beyond the pale. Laws of hospitality were some of the and still are, some of the most important customs that there are, even today in the Middle East. If you take in a stranger, you're going to feed them, you're going to give them shelter, you're going to give them a measure of protection. Even if you would meet with another person out on the desert and you ate bread together with salt, you were required to protect each other. It was like you were family for the time being. Hospitality was very important. The people of Sodom, they weren't even obeying the laws of the land. This was very serious. Very serious. They were acting dishonorably. They were breaking every convention that is held sacred to the ancient Near Eastern code of conduct. So that's why they were singled out for beyond the pale judgment, fire, and brimstone. Anyway, they come in, and Lot takes them in, he feeds them, and he provides them shelter. And according to the laws, he is also required to protect them at the cost of anything, even at the cost of his own life and the lives of his family members. So, of course, we know that the men of Sodom start beating down the door, and they want these men. And Lot does something that, remember I told you, just because someone's righteous doesn't mean that what they always do is right. And sometimes they just act according to what's okay in their societies. Okay? And so Lot says, take my daughters instead. Instead of saying, take me. We would look at an honorable man today, and an honorable man would say, take me instead, but leave my wife, leave my kids, leave these strangers alone. Lot didn't do that. Bible people aren't always perfect, and we should never expect them to be. We never should expect them to be anything that we aren't. We mess up, and we do things that are wrong all the time. So people in the Bible, they do it too. So don't always look at them as examples. Sometimes they're an example of the wrong thing to do. But Lot was actually behaving in accordance with his culture. Culture colors how we see things. It colors what we do. Today is no different than it was. Anyway, so fortunately that didn't happen, and the angels intervened. They pulled Lot inside, and they struck the men with blindness, and they sent Lot and his family out of the city so that they would escape the judgment. It all comes down to what God expects of us in how to treat the oppressed, how to treat foreigners and widows and orphans. It's one of the most important parts of God's laws, and it's something that we can do today too. It's very important. In February, I'm going to be going to Costa Rica. I'm very, very excited. I'm going to be going and visiting my friend Joel and his wife Gabby. They do missions work in Costa Rica. They have a very poor population there, and they do work with widows and orphans. And I'm so excited to be going there because they're fulfilling the divine mandate for justice and righteousness. And we can do that too. We support Joel. We have some Compassion International kids that are like almost adults now that we've been supporting since they were like 6. There are all these wonderful opportunities to take care of people who are less fortunate than we are. And it's a biblical commandment that if we see people who are oppressed and being denied justice, we see people who are needy through no fault of their own, that we are to have compassion on them. Now, Sodom wasn't. Sodom, not only were they not taking care of their citizens in need, I mean, it says right there, these weren't poor people. It says they were very prideful. It means that they had status, they had honor, okay? They had excess food. They lived in prosperous ease. Now, when I think of prosperous ease, I think, being able to have the air conditioner turned up all summer long and the heater turned up all winter long, and, just having a comfy place to sleep and not have to worry about getting your bills paid, having enough, okay, that prosperous ease. Even though they were well off, they didn't help the poor and needy. And when we live like that and we refuse to help the poor and the needy, something happens to us on the inside. We stop seeing our neighbors as real people, and we start judging them and looking down on them, and our hearts grow cold towards our neighbors. I think that's how it started in Sodom and Gomorrah and the other two cities of the plains. I think they simply stopped taking care of the oppressed, stopped taking care of the widows and orphans and the needy. Before too long, their society had completely fallen apart. Nobody just starts out breaking the laws. People start out by not caring about other people. And so that is our lesson this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Sodom and Gomorrah, boy, they faced terrible judgment. Such terrible judgment that, Nineveh, later in the Bible when we get to Jonah, Nineveh was doing the same kinds of things. They were oppressing people, but they repented. When Lot went even to his own future sons-in-laws, they laughed at him and thought he was joking. They were so at ease that they weren't taking God seriously. At least with Nineveh, they took God seriously. That's why everyone in Sodom was destroyed, but Nineveh was spared. We always have the chance to turn things around and do things God's way. And God's way means we take care of those who are less fortunate than ourselves, people who are at risk of being oppressed. So that was Torah portion Vayera, and that was a very difficult concept lesson that usually I only teach to grown-ups, so I hope it made a lot of sense. And see you next week for Chaye Sarai. It's the life of Sarah. Okay, now if you still want more, if all that wasn't enough, I'd like you to go out and check out my brother Stan's website, www.torahpuppets.com, for some great coloring pages and Bible lessons in a fun and zany way. And if, as a family, you would like to explore some of the deeper subjects that I have to kind of skim over and pass over, I recommend my new context series, Context for Kids, Volume 1, Honor and Shame in the Bible. It's a 50-lesson course that'll take your families through these steps towards understanding the very, very important concepts of honor and shame, not only in Bible times, but in the news today. We see these throughout the Middle East, and it makes it a whole heck of a lot easier to understand what's going on in the news. Till next week, have a wonderful time studying Scripture together.